Well, Mike, thanks so much for joining me today. Great to be chatting and sharing with you. And you're a little bit warmer dressed than what I am at the moment.
Just a touch, mate. I'm over in British Columbia right now, and the last time I checked, it was -2 outside. So there's still snow on the ground here. So I'm doing my best to stay warm. Hence the beard as well. Let's keep it long because the longer it is, the warmer my face today is when I'm
That's
outside.
it, mate. We've got 37 and blue sky back here. So when you are back in town, mate, make sure you leave the jacket there.
Rough, rough. Hey, Perth's always beautiful, isn't it?
So, Mike, look, we'd love to have a conversation today about your own journey and your kind of career path and moving into, setting up your own business coaching consultancy and really, yeah, how you found yourself in that space and focusing in on executive staff and particularly sales staff.
Sure, yeah. Well, mate, there's quite a long story to that, so I'm going to keep it as brief as I can. I was born in Boston in the United
Mm.
States, and in 1997, I was 21 years old, attending university in the US, playing baseball, and I decided to come to Australia for what was supposed to be a 6-month study abroad, 6 months, have fun, and then go back and finish my
Mm.
degree and be a normal human
Mm.
being and go and get a job and all that stuff. Turned out that was never really going to be for
Mm.
me. So in that first 6 months of being in Australia, I was living in Sydney on the beach at Coogee, and I had the best time, as you do. The Coogee Bay Hotel was my second home at the
Beautiful.
time. 6 months there, loved it, and decided I didn't want to go back to the US. I took a class on US history, specifically Vietnam,
Mm.
and very early on recognized that I'd been lied to.
Mm.
Now, I've since recognized that, yeah, the Aussies did their own bit of lying as well, but we won't go too far down that track. So history is always written by the victor,
Indeed.
right? So I decided to stay in the country, and that meant working out a way to get a visa and being able to work legally and all that stuff. But it was necessary to get a job and earn some money straight away. And so I answered an ad in the newspaper. It just said, apply today, start tomorrow. Marketing company looking for enthusiastic young people to, go and represent our clients. So what those words translate into is door-to-door sales, commission only. Come in, and if you're going to, you can learn how to sell. Um, I got good at that pretty quick. And 18 months later, I incorporated my first company at the ripe old age of 22. I had no idea what it actually meant to be a managing director at the time, but hey, that was my title, and let's run with it, right? Young, dumb, and full of enthusiasm, and very uneducated on the subject of business. So I ran that business for almost 10 years. And while I had really high highs and made loads of money when it was a high, I also had horribly terrible
Mm.
lows. And I did this roller coaster thing where things were going great and we were printing
Mm.
money. Next thing you knew, I was losing money left, right, and
Mm.
center. And I started to think that maybe there was something wrong with me.
Mm.
Like I wasn't cut out for business. Maybe I'm the issue. I got no idea what I'm doing. So I started to hire coaches to support me. And like I went through the whole E-Myth coaching program that was around at that time and a few other things. And these coaches all had good information. They had systems that they wanted me to implement, and none of it was bad. But I found that what they were doing was meeting with me once a week or once every 2 weeks, and every meeting would be, right, Mike, we wanted you to implement these 15 systems in the last week or a fortnight. How did you go? Did you do it? And I'd be going, no, I didn't. I had 100 hours a week of work that I did, and like, I don't know how I'm going to get to this. And I found that a lot of the process was actually making my life more stressful. And I was looking for ways to remove stress. Like I was looking for ways to make life a bit easier, make running the business a bit easier, and that wasn't happening. And so in the end, I really was very disillusioned with
Mm.
business when I was turning 30. I was disillusioned with my life. I had, money and houses and cars and motorbikes, and I thought all that stuff was going to make me really happy, and I was miserable, and I didn't understand why. So 10 years of experience in training and building sales teams and teaching people a system to follow so that they could earn money commission only. If they didn't earn, I didn't earn. So it was important that they were successful. And just before I turned 30, so 2006, I hit a real low and I was more disillusioned than ever. And I was looking for support. And I wasn't ready to hire any other business coach because I didn't want 50 ways of improving sales and 100 ways to increase your marketing reach. I wanted somebody who's going to really be able to help me to transform how I was thinking. And that's when I met the group of people that I now call my research team. So I went into a 6-month coaching program that totally and utterly changed my life. I wouldn't call it business coaching. I would call that performance coaching. And, you know, we do a lot of that. Apologies if there's a bit of background noise. The dog's barking downstairs. Um, so that 6 months formed the seed of what is now advanced business
Mm.
abilities. And since 2007, I've been performance coaching business owners and senior executives and leaders across the world to implement a framework that makes leadership, sales, and communication far more effortless.
It's awesome. Great personal story and how you've gone on the journey yourself, and now you're helping others go on the journey from a place of really understanding it. Mm.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really key component. I don't think you don't really understand something until you can teach it yourself. And there's no point in learning something from someone if they don't really understand
Yeah.
it, because you're just going to pick up their errors in understanding, and that's not going to support you to get where you want to
Mm.
go.
Mm. And it's such a it's such an interesting point you make about people with almost just way too many systems, way too much to do to kind of make a business successful. Um, and I remember similar in my own journey of building and growing. I'm kind of into my second business at the moment with recruitment. And I remember in my first business in financial advice, I realized pretty quickly, I was like, there's so many ideas out there. There's so many systems out there that actually the most important thing is execution, actually doing just one thing, just two things at a time, not 15, not 20. Let me add one thing that I can do really, really well and turn it into autopilot mode. And then I can add a second, and then maybe I can add a third, to really kind of get the business moving.
Yeah, I tend to talk about that in terms of the key component is
Mm.
implementation.
Yeah.
So execution, implementation, the things that get in the way of someone implementing a good idea,
Mm.
that's what you really want to focus on and look at, right?
Mm.
So the how-to of running a business, that's all available for free
Yeah.
online. Go and use Google, go and use ChatGPT or Claude. Ask any question and you're going to get a really good
Mm.
answer, right? So the problem's not how to do it. The problem is in the implementation of the actions that are involved in doing it. And that's where I've really focused my attention over the last 19 years
Mm.
now. What gets in the way of successful implementation?
Mm.
And the biggest thing that gets in the way is always what goes on between your two listeners.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, on that note, let's jump in terms of those trends, and you're alluding to the way people think, but the trends that are currently shaping high performing teams and specifically high performing sales teams. What are you saying?
And honestly, the number one thing that I see right now is it's time to throw away the sales scripts.
Mm.
They are absolutely killing your
Wow.
sales because they're killing the connection that can be created with your prospect or your existing client. I think sales scripts do a lot of damage. And it's not the script itself.
Mm.
That's not the
Mm.
problem. The problem is that what you end up with is a quote unquote sales team that literally sit and read off of a script. And so there's no genuine connection.
Mm.
And if something happens in the conversation that goes off the script, they don't know how to
Mm.
respond. They're not thinking with a framework that guides the conversation. They're reading the script. And I don't know about you, but I get pitched 10 times a day, either via email or cold
Mm.
calls. And I can tell you that in the last 15 years, there's been one cold call. where I actually had a conversation with the person, because that the person just nailed
Mm.
it. They had their tone was
Yeah.
right. They asked questions. They were genuine. They were interested, and I ended up in a great conversation with that
Yeah.
person. But that's one out of however many hundreds or thousands have occurred, right? So move away from sales scripts and selling techniques.
Yeah.
Let go of those. Those aren't helping. If you approach sales from the point of view of it's just communication,
Mm.
and if you approach it from the point of view of ensuring that you understand what your prospect wants, that's absolutely the best and most effortless way to
Mm.
sell, because nobody likes to get sold to. No, nobody wants to listen to you follow a script or ask you leading and yes questions in order to move me closer to saying yes. That feels horrible. And people can tell, they pick up on it. That we're not dealing with an uneducated market
Mm.
anymore. There's a sophisticated buyer out there. And those sophisticated buyers, they know the signs. They can tell when you're just following a script attempting to grab some money. What they look for now is genuine connection.
Mm.
They look for somebody who is measured in their approach. They listen for somebody who doesn't make promises they can't keep and asks a lot of questions, asks intelligent questions that perhaps the buyer hasn't even thought of
Mm.
themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then are you saying people should really be throwing out scripts entirely, or perhaps using scripts in a much more fluid kind of way, get rid of the formula, or is it, would you encourage guys just have a series of notes in front of you, kind of key points where you maybe want a conversation to go?
So I'm a big advocate for having a guide instead of a
Mm.
script. A guide gives a framework, right? A well-written guide creates a context, and that salesperson is then completely free to move around within that context. When I say context, what I mean is this is providing a context for the water. Within the mug, the water's free to move around as much as it wants to within that
Yeah.
context. All the mug does is make sure it doesn't spill all over my keyboard on the desk, right? A good guide creates a context for the salesperson to stay within. But within that context, they can move around and be as free and creative as they choose to be in the
Mm.
conversation. The more that they understand that context, and the context is not just the guide, it's also the models, principles, and systems that govern the process of sales. The more somebody understands that, and that's a framework, the more somebody understands that, the more effortless it is to sell a product that you believe
Mm.
in, a product that you stand by, a product that you put your name to.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, really good. And so, Mike, when you're working with sales teams, I know you implement some technology, and you and I have been talking a lot about your personality and aptitude kind of testing you use, because I've seen it, and I think it's the best of all the kind of psychometric profiling pieces of software that I've used and tests that I've gone through. Going through the one I went through with you and sitting down and doing the debrief was fantastic. And you and I have talked about that at length. Tell me about what you're using in tech,
Mm.
how you use it, how, potentially it can be used in a hiring process. Would love to hear about that.
Yeah, gladly. So everyone's probably heard of the age-old adage that says, hey, being good at sales is all about your
Mm.
attitude, right? And I first was told that and learned that in 1997 when I went out and hit the field for the first time knocking on doors. Keep your attitude. Attitude's everything,
Yeah.
right? But no one could ever tell me what attitude was. What's this mean? Keep a good attitude. Okay, let's just be positive, right? It's not that. It's actually much, much deeper than that. And I'll extend this because this doesn't just impact people in
Mm.
sales. If you're in leadership, you're in sales far more than any sales rep that's out in the field banging on
Mm.
doors. And so attitude is everything. Attitude is what determines the height potential of a team, and it's the combined attitude of all the people on the team plays a large part in creating culture,
Mm.
right? So I wish that I'd had the tool that we use now. I wish that I'd had that when I was 21, 22. And I wish that I had the wherewithal and understanding of how to use it back then. I'd be a lot further ahead than I am right now. In saying that, it's the most valuable tool that I've found.
Mm,
So I call them the predictor
mm,
profiles. And that kind of explains what they do. They predict how someone's going to behave over the next, let's call it 12 months. So they predict how a person will behave in the next 12 months when that person's placed under pressure.
mm.
How are they going to respond to difficult situations? How are they going to react to challenging conversations? What aptitudes do they have? In fact, the simplest way to explain what the tests measure, four main areas. So they measure aptitude, attitude, general competency, and ability. And if I use an analogy to describe this, it's kind of like looking at a person through the analogy of a helicopter and a pilot. So in this analogy, the person taking the assessment is the pilot of their own private helicopter. Now, as a pilot, they're going to have had an amount of training that they've been through, and they're going to have strengths, weaknesses, and blind spots. And we want to know what those are, because that's going to tell us whether or not they are really suitable for the role that you're recruiting for, right? If you're recruiting for a sales rep, it's pretty important that they do well on the sales ability test. If they don't do well on the sales ability test, that kind of predicts the results you're going to get from them in sales
Yeah,
in the
I hope they
field,
do
right?
well on that.
It'd be pretty important, right? So we want to know those strengths, weaknesses, and blind spots and the amount of training they've been through as a pilot. But we also want to know whether or not the helicopter that they're flying is flying within its design
Yeah.
tolerances. So how does a helicopter work? Well, there's a big rotor at the top of the chopper that provides lift and handles steering. So it kind of sits on a gimbal, right? Now, that big rotor is representative of general competency in a human. And there are 7 traits that make up general competency. So we're talking about traits like focus, motivation, communication, self-confidence. If you score within tolerances on these particular traits, well, that means that you're a generally competent person. In our analogy, that big rotor is performing exactly the way that you've been trained that it will. It's going to provide enough lift, you'll be able to steer, you'll fly from A to B, and you'll use the right amount of fuel. But let's say that those 7 competency traits are out of tolerance. Well, the more out of tolerance they are, the more difficulty you're going to have as the pilot flying the
Mm,
machine. Worst case scenario, it may not provide enough lift to get up in the air. You may struggle to steer and hold a
mm,
direction, or you fly from A to B, but you might use twice the amount of fuel as what you thought you would. All of those will be problems that, as a pilot, you're dealing with, right? Now, when that big rotor spins at the top, there's a small rotor at the back of the chopper, and it produces something called anti-torque. So it stops the whole machine from spinning on that one
yeah.
axis. Well, that small rotor is representative of attitude and integrity in
Mm,
humans. And there are 5 traits that make up attitude and integrity. So those traits are things like negative, critical, blame, dishonesty, unsupportive. If those traits are all within tolerance, then as a pilot, you're going to have a really easy time flying the machine. It's going to produce stability and balance in flight.
yeah.
But the more that those traits are out of tolerance, the more difficulty you'll have as a pilot. You're going to be constantly working to deal with the issues that arise. So we've used these assessments now for, well, since 2006 when I first took them for the first time myself, and they have proven time and time and time and time again to be incredibly accurate. They actually tell us how accurate they are for every single assessment that gets completed. And they've got 5 different reliability and accuracy and consistency measures built into the assessments themselves. So me personally, I wouldn't build a team without using these assessments ever again. I won't. Our clients can use the assessments as a step in their recruiting process. And if they do that, as long as they learn to develop trust with the assessments will help them identify who's best to interview for the role.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. And digging in a little bit further, you talked about the sales ability test, and I've seen
Mm.
sales testing plenty of times. Um, but what impressed me about the test you have is the way that it has, I think it's 10 traits that it's actually testing
Yeah,
for.
the sales ability test. Yeah, it's more than 10, but it's not a huge number. This I think the sales ability test has, I think it's 20 traits across that particular
Yeah.
assessment.
Yeah. And within that, what it shows you is where someone can be, a good sales performer, a medium high sales performer, but even within those good performers, it can find the pockets where you're going to be able to help that person and unblock and unlock some of that potential, because it's not as simple as, a score out of 100 or something like that.
That's right. It finds subtle areas. I mean, your best salespeople, people who know what they're
Mm,
doing, they're still constantly looking for the extra 1 or 2% or
mm,
3% that keeps them at the top of their game,
mm,
right? What our assessments are able to do is help to identify the subtle resistance that just slightly keeps somebody restricted from being able to access their full potential. Now, that's really what our business is about. So, yep, we've got this awesome tool in the assessments, but that tool, while it's awesome, what it does is helps us identify where are the little things that we can help somebody to move or adjust or shift about themselves, about their thinking, that's going to help them move to the next level in their ability.
mm. And that probably leads to one of the other, sort of challenges or pitfalls of testing is when people, perhaps see the testing as God in a certain way, or as the final word on should we hire this person? Well, let's put them through to testing, and I share the story of the 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 time I've had someone go through testing, and the client themselves had never sat the testing. And candidate failed, and they were a little bit confused because the candidate was amazing in the interview and had built a good career. And then the client did the test, and they also failed. And then they realized, hmm, perhaps the test is the issue. So tell me how you actually utilize those tests and the results within them.
Yeah, it's a really funny thing that you just spoke about, because what happens often is that, when we build a team, if we don't have access to a tool like this, it's really easy to build a team that are people that are really similar to you, or that have similar or the same blind spots and weaknesses as what you
Yeah.
do. It's one of the reasons that you like them. That's why you hire
Yeah.
them, right? It's really fascinating. I've seen it happen time and time
Mm,
again. The predominant thing that we use the assessments for within our business, I mean, yes, we use them for recruiting and we support our clients to use them in their recruiting process. But the fundamental thing that we use them for is when somebody comes to us wanting help. So they want to grow their business, they want to improve the quality of their team, they want to change their sales results, they want better conversions without any extra spend on marketing. We use the assessments to determine where is this person or this team starting from. So what's their baseline? What's their attitude like right now? What are their competencies like? What are their aptitudes? And what do they understand about sales? So we start with that, and we then use that data to create a program to help that person or that team to improve their results. And most of the time, clients that engage with us, they end up working with us for anywhere between, I mean, at the absolute shortest, it's 6 months, but most of the members of our community tend to engage with us over a 2, 3, 4, even an 8-year period. And that only happens because of the results that we produce. The test is the starting point, it gives us a baseline. We can then use those same assessments to monitor how somebody's progressing over a 2 or 3 year period. Once a year or once every 18 months, if they choose to complete the assessments again, it helps to narrow a focus.
Mike, what do you see? You mentioned there the pitfall of hiring people that look like you, and sometimes that's a good thing. It's not inherently a negative. And if you're a good sales guy and they look like you, they might also be a good salesperson.
Yes.
But what are some of the pitfalls you see in that kind of interviewing process, and how can hiring managers make better hiring decisions?
It's an awesome question. There was a study done by a company called Leadership IQ in the United States, and this study tracked over 20,000 applicants for different roles over an 18-month period, or maybe it was 24 months. Don't quote me on that. They tracked how these applicants went. So if they were offered the job or not, and if they were offered the job, how well did they perform? How did things go? Where did they end up? Right? And the data from that was fascinating. So by the 18-month mark, 49% of new starts, so 49% of people who had applied for a job and been given the job
Mm.
at the 18-month mark were no longer in the job.
Wow.
49%.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, the number's huge. It's unbelievable. It basically means when you're hiring, if you follow kind of normal hiring practices, you might actually be better off if you go down the casino and choose red or black. That's what the data
Wow.
shows, right? But when you dig into the data even deeper, it was fascinating because what they actually saw after conducting a bunch of interviews is that of the 49% who were no longer in the job, guess what the percentage was that were no longer in the job due to an attitudinal problem?
It's got to be high. It's got to be high. If you can't crack 18 months, I don't know, 60%?
89%.
Wow.
89% of those who were no longer in the job at the 18-month mark, the main reason they were no longer in the job had nothing to do with ability or skill.
Mm.
It had to do with attitude. Lots of companies have different cultures, and so you want to make sure that you're hiring people that are going to fit within your culture. But I think one of the things you can really focus on that's a successful action is making sure that you've got a positive, supportive, um, high-performing company culture. Now that doesn't mean working 100
Mm.
hours a week. A high-performing company culture means we get things done. We're productive as a team. We're supportive as a team. So I'm a big advocate for making sure that people do use some form of objective
Mm.
assessment, which the predictor profiles are. They're the best ones I've found, but I'm not here to attempt to tell everybody that they ought to be using
Mm.
those. They're just one, right? One of the things that I think is really valuable is most people who are in a hiring manager role have never been through any training on how to conduct an interview.
Yeah.
And so they're supposed to make decisions and hire people. They're supposed to conduct interviews, but they've got no idea how to actually do
Mm.
it. And that opens them up to a massive potential problem because what I see a lot of people conducting interviews do is they get a list of, for example, behavioral based questions,
Yeah.
which can be super
Mm.
valuable. But what I watch most people do is they ask the question and then they telegraph the answer that they're looking for
Mm.
because they finish the question off with so tell me about a time you had a difficulty with a manager at work and how did you handle that, right? The how did you handle that, just leave it out. Don't ask that. that's
Mm.
that's a poor finish to the
Mm.
question because you're telegraphing, telling them what you want them to
Yeah.
tell you.
Wow.
Whereas if you were to just ask, hey, tell me about a time you had a difficulty with a manager at work, you will be blown away by how many people will turn around and go, oh, well, look, I probably shouldn't say this, but my last manager, he was just an asshole, and they just launch into
Yeah.
it. There's an indicator of an attitude problem,
Yeah.
potentially.
Wow.
And a lot of people who conduct interviews are very uncomfortable with silence. And so that poses a problem because they fill the silence. And the other thing is that when you're conducting an interview, there are lots of people out in the world right now who provide a service. They actually sell a service training people who are going to go in for interviews how to handle the interview. And a lot of them, what they actually do is teach the person being interviewed to ask
Yeah.
questions. Which I'll be honest is really clever because as soon as the person being interviewed asks questions, what happens is they get the person who's conducting the interview talking, and the next thing you know, the interview's finished and the interviewer has done all the talking, and they walk out going, "This candidate's fantastic. I love this person." Why? Because the person sat and listened to them the whole time.
Hmm.
So it's important to develop the skill of conducting an interview if you're going to be looking to hire people. And it's not just a simple conversation. There are ways of getting the information that you want to understand. And that's a skill set. That's a really valuable skill set to develop.
Yeah. Yeah. I've told you this story before, but a candidate came out of an interview one time and just rings me and goes, hiring manager's going to call you. They're going to say it was a fantastic interview. And that's because I did 20% of the talking. I asked some great questions. They told me all of the great things they've done in the business. They were excited. I still want to go for a second interview. I really want to work there, but there's a lot more ground to cover than what they think there is. And I was like, oh, wow. You've clearly interviewed too many times. You've gotten very
Yeah.
good at this in your 30-year
Well,
career, and it's very impressive.
yeah, well, and that's another thought that I'll share with you. So from my perspective, when we're recruiting, if I see a resume that looks spectacular,
Mm,
like if you get really excited the moment you see the resume, and everything that's on the resume is like they can do this and they can do this, and I'm getting
yeah.
excited. And then you interview the person, and the interview ends, and you walk out of the interview going, "My God, this person's bloody fantastic. I don't know thank our lucky
Mm,
stars." Those are all warning signs to me. Those are red
wow.
flags. Yeah, those are massive red flags. First of all, whose resume is going to look that good? Somebody who's paid someone else to write the resume for
Mm,
them, and somebody who's had a lot of practice at it. Number two, who interviews that well? People who have done lots and lots of interviews and people who have had training on how to conduct interviews, how to be in an
mm,
interview. One of the things I love to see is when I actually interview somebody and they're genuinely nervous.
mm,
That tells me that, hey, this person's actually probably not done a lot of interviews. They haven't been trained in this. And it's funny, when you find the person who's really nervous and you look back through their resume, they've often been at their previous roles for 5, 6, 8, 10
yes.
years each
Yeah.
role. The people who interview really well and have a great looking resume, they're always in their previous roles for 2 years or
Mm,
less. That's a red flag to
yeah.
me. Because how long are they going to stick around with me or with
Yeah.
you? Oh, it's probably only going to be a couple of years. And how long does it take for somebody to become completely inducted and profitable in a role in a business? That takes a minimum of 18
Yeah.
months, which is why that company Leadership IQ studied
Mm,
18 to 24 months to look at what
yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
So I hope that's helpful and I hope everybody's gotten value from
Oh,
that.
Mike.
Is there anything else you want to chat about?
Super helpful. I think that's it for the moment, mate. Been an
Awesome, man.
fantastic conversation. Love talking about what's happening in sales team. Loved hearing your story and the predictive profiles, the way you're helping organizations make better decisions, and the coaching service. And Mike, how can people get a hold of you if they want to reach out and connect with you and your business?
Really easy. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll find me there, Mike Irving. And our website is advancedbusinessabilities.com. And if you go there, you'll find plenty of information. There'll be a spot you can go. And if you want to have a chat, you can do that. We've got a book out right now called Sales Scripts Are Dead, funny enough. And another book that is launching soon. We haven't actually officially launched it yet, but the next book coming out is called Unseen Leadership,
Mm.
and you'll be able to access those soon as
Oh,
well.
looking forward to that one. Unseen leadership. I like it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed the
Thanks for your
chat.
time, Mike.